If you are caring for someone else, whether paid or unpaid, and no matter how many hours you do it, did you realise that you may be missing out on thousands of pounds of discounts for things that you may use every day? The Able to Care podcast is proud to be sponsored by the UK's #1 carers card. Started by two best friends who recognise that carers deserve better and are 100% committed to helping to change the lives of all carers and bringing them together as a strong community. Carers Card UK provides support, recognition and rewards. It offers reassurance by providing an ID card that helps access emergency information when needed, while also unlocking discounts, a wellbeing hub, a carers circle tool and a community through their app. All of this for less than the price of a box of chocolates a year. There are discounts on gym membership, days out, electrical goods, clothing and even glasses. Let others know you care while taking a little care of yourself with an ID card you can be proud of. Visit carerscarduk.co.uk/promo code/able to care today to order yours.
Welcome to the Able to Care podcast. My name is Tem, and today I'm interviewing Andy Baker on his upcoming book, Targeting the Positive.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me today.
That's all right. And it's lovely to have a bit of a role reversal. Obviously, usually I'm still always sat in this particular seat, but it is lovely to have somebody else on the other side interviewing me. It feels a bit weird, feels a bit uncomfortable.
It's good to be uncomfortable sometimes.
Absolutely.
So in your book, Andy, you mentioned a traumatic experience that happened to you as a 16-year-old. And you talked about how that propelled you onto your journey to understanding behaviours. And you have a mission to provide caregivers with tools to help them manage challenging behaviours and become more confident and resilient. But I want to know, what is the driving passion behind that mission? Where's it? I understand you talked about traumatic experience, but what is the underlying fire that burns within you?
I'd always been interested in behaviour. When I was originally at school, I wanted to be a zoologist. That was actually my aim. Okay. I say that. I wanted to be David Attenborough. That's probably the best way of putting it. So I actually studied drama and biology because I thought that's what he knows, surely. Because I always used to find animal behaviour fascinating, but I never studied psychology or anything at school. Wasn't introduced to it. When I was mugged at knife point when I was 16 years old, because I was already quite an accomplished martial artist at that point, I got quite a lot of grief, kind of going, "Oh, why didn't you kill him? Why didn't you do this, that, and the other?" And that forced me to I was very self-reflective. Like, why didn't I? Why didn't I defend myself? Why didn't I do anything different? And so I started to investigate the understanding of self-defense and things like that. And I came across the work of a guy called Jeff Thompson and read a book called Dead or Alive, which he started introducing this whole idea of the fear response and the psychology of conflict and confrontation. And that kind of propelled me into just finding the subject fascinating and started just reading and absorbing stuff. And although it wasn't years later until I started officially studying it, it was something that had always been a bit of a passion project, and I'd read an awful lot of stuff before I started on that official journey. When I started working within the care sector, one of the things that I found that there was a high level of focus on the well-being of the individuals that the caregivers were supporting. There's the same as in teaching for yourself, for your field, there's an awful lot of focus on the well-being of the children. But I kept encountering people when I was teaching around kind of behaviour management stuff. They were being punched, kicked, hit, or just being verbally bludgeoned on a day-to-day basis, where they're being called names and all sorts. And I could see that it was really affecting people. It was people in training courses when I was delivering training were often quite confrontational towards me, sometimes in a case of, I could see there was burnout. I could see that they were trying their very best to do a really good job and look after these people. But at the same time, they were then experiencing this high level of violence. And I think that really spurred me on to kind of, because I'd been the victim of violence, I think maybe that's a little bit of a kind of I empathized with that and I didn't feel it was fair. And I felt although there should always be a massive level of focus on the people we're supporting and the vulnerable, and whether it be kids or whether it be, adults with dementia or whatever it is, that it shouldn't just be about them. And I felt an awful lot of caregivers were underarmed, under-resourced, and didn't have the knowledge and tools that they needed to be able to keep themselves safe, but also to better manage situations. And I thought, because they're burnt out, that seems to be having a huge knock-on effect to the well-being of the service users, clients, residents, whoever it is they're looking after. And therefore, something needs to change. And I started, because I found it fascinating anyway, it just took me down that journey. And I say that is my drive. So I have this, my company in Able Training, we have a kind of one of our aims is to positive outcomes for all. And I'm very specific around that because I feel an awful lot of places focus on the positive outcomes of just the individuals we're supporting. And it is such a symbiotic relationship that happy kids help for happy teachers, but happy teachers help for happy kids. So exactly the same within that teaching world. That's exactly that. It's a massive thing that connection and that understanding behavior has helped me. I'd have no animosity towards my mugger. It's been a lot of years, I was 16 at the time. But I served him a beer years later in a pub. He didn't know who I was, but I knew who he was. But I felt no animosity because I no longer judge people as good and bad because I understand human behavior. And because of that, I think it's helped me to cope with a lot of things that have happened in my life that haven't been great. And therefore, if I can pass that same stuff on to other people, then yeah, I think that's my driving passion. Yeah, there's a few in there, I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's quite admirable that you served in beer.
Yeah.
Years
Yeah.
later. Wow.
And I didn't do anything to the glass either. It was it was a clean glass and it was a nicely served beer. All hygiene precautions were taken.
Now, in your book, you also talk about behaviours that challenge.
Yes.
Now, you've reframed the way I think as a teacher, because I always used to call it challenging behaviours. I understand that by changing the language can change how you interpret it, how you sort of perceive the behaviours. Now, as teachers, a lot of things in your book resonates a lot with me, but we have a lot of behaviours that challenge in our classrooms that we have to deal with. And of course, we don't always know the background history of the children that we work with, especially if it is quite traumatic. So how, as teachers, do we implement effective strategies to deal with these behaviours that challenge in a mainstream setting when we have 30 odd kids in front of us and we have to ensure the well-being of them and, of course, us as teachers?
The language, and there's a lot in the book that talks about language and the importance of language. And I think we are more aware socially as far as language having an impact. It isn't just to kind of make sure I'm not taking credit for something. I didn't change that wording. There has been a bit of a cultural shift, and there's other organizations I think I talk about in the book of behaviors of concern and distress behaviors. And there's lots of different language and terminologies, but I've always quite resonated because I think that psychology of shifting that language, challenge behavior to behaviors that challenge, because I like that language because I think a challenge is sometimes a positive thing. It's something to overcome. It's something to learn. It's something to grow from. And it isn't just challenging for the person that's experiencing it. It's also challenging for the person who's displaying the behavior that we're finding difficult. Happy people don't, and I'm going to use a phrasing kick off, but we shouldn't use the phrasing kick off. That's one of the words that I say we should avoid. So straight away, if it's challenging for us, it's more than likely they're experiencing some level of challenge themselves as well. So I like that language, but shifting the focus from labeling it as challenging behavior to, well, I'm finding this difficult, but I need to understand why I'm finding it difficult. So when we've got a classroom of 30 kids, you're 100% right. It's really difficult to kind of address because it isn't just about the behavior of that child. Do I not like it? It's impacting on other kids in the classroom and their education and their learning, for instance. And that's the same within a residential setting. Like, one individual within the lounge just screaming and shouting may not be really a big deal if they were in a house on their own, but when they're in a room of other people, that's then potentially impacting on the well-being of others as well. The main reason that I like the change in language, though, is because that's not always the case. And an important message we're always trying to get over in the model is picking your battles. And I think sometimes we need to be very, very mindful of our own values, beliefs, and attitudes of going, well, I don't agree with this. Well, that doesn't mean you're universally correct. We need to look at it from a cost benefit analysis. And the cost benefit analysis is it impacting on, is it affecting the health, safety and well-being of the individual concerned? Is it affecting the health, safety and well-being of others? Is it affecting their social inclusion or the ability for others to learn? Or is it the fact that I don't like it and I don't agree with it? And if it falls in second category, well, who's to say it's their challenging behavior rather than yours? So within the kind of the school should be setting out this consistency as far as what do we and don't we allow within the best interests of the children and the teachers and everybody concerned. Because one of the examples I use is often in children's homes or residential homes and stuff like that. But most of us move out of home from that, where we get to that point where we can't cope with that nagging parent anymore. Okay. That the way we want to act, behave, and live our lives is sometimes slightly different to their value structure. So if I want to eat my dinner and just leave my plate on the side for half an hour while I just allow it to digest, and then I will get to it and I will clean it, but then I'm being nagged by somebody else going, why do you keep leaving this mess? There'll be reach a point going, I need my own space. I need to move away. I need to create my own environment. What I try and get over is how many nagging parents do some individuals in residential live with? How many nagging parents do many kids going to school have to interact with? And it isn't just one. There was an example I saw not that long ago where it was a girl who turned up in inappropriate uniform, for instance. And it wasn't just one teacher that mentioned at the front door, that's not the appropriate uniform. I will have a chat with your mum and send a letter home with you and done. Every person that then walked down the corridor went, what's going on there? Now, this was a primary school. More than likely, that kid didn't get themselves dressed. So that wasn't the kid's fault. But they got criticised and told they weren't good enough and told they were bad 5 times in the time I was walking with them. So how many nagging parents are they dealing with? So I was doing like how many per shift for some individuals. So I think that's where the importance of that language is concerned. Now, when it's then 30, you've got to kind of take all into consideration, but it should be responding rather than reacting. It should be looking at it as a kind of am I just in a bad mood and therefore I'm finding this irritating? Or is it a fact that, no, this is something we can't have in the classroom. This is something that's impacting.
Now, when it comes to uniform, I've done a podcast episode on uniform and what we have to do in schools, because of course we have our hierarchy, so to speak. So we have our senior leaders that say to us that if a student walks down the corridor, make sure you dress their uniform, but do it in a non-confrontational way. You can do it non-verbally, just because we don't want to then ignite something and start escalating something. So in terms of the primary school, of course, we shouldn't be saying to a student, what's wrong with that uniform? What are you doing there? No, you need to sort your uniform out. That's the wrong way to approach the situation. So we've been told just to say, look, just tuck your shirt for me, please, as you walk past. Fantastic, looking smart, excellent, well done. Or blazer on, don't forget before you get to the next lesson. And so I get why we have to address uniform, but of course there's appropriate way to do it, and the way that child was dealt with, so to speak, was not appropriate.
So, I mean, I have slight issues with uniform, and there is arguments for and against, and I'm not completely like with me. The one thing is, what's the uniform of the teachers? Teachers aren't in uniform. They're not role modeling it. So why then are we expecting children to? How many of us then and why don't all adults have to go in suit and tie? If they choose to as part of the job and stuff like that, then that's the expectation of. But there's some ways I get it and some ways I don't, as far as uniform's concerned. I think especially when it comes to the really hot weather and being forced to keep your blazer on and stuff like that. It's just, there's elements of tradition doesn't necessarily mean good. And I think there is some schools that sometimes are steeped in kind of tradition and they're trying to hold on to that tradition, but that doesn't necessarily promote well-being. However, that's a different point. That's me soapboxing and kind of going, I really think it needs really evaluating. Is that the right thing and best interest for an education of a child? I get cohesion and community and stuff like that could all be quite positive for it, or also reducing the stress of comparison and stuff. So there is reasons and for and against. With the addressing, the big thing I have is that I think you're right. I don't ever want people to kind of misunderstand that I don't think there should be rules and boundaries, because life is filled with rules and boundaries, and we need to making sure that individuals kind of are understanding them and following them. And kids feel safer with consistency and boundaries, but it's the way that we manage and encourage and enforce those boundaries, which is important. If somebody isn't following a boundary, it doesn't mean that they're bad. It may be a reason for it. Like, why do then kids not wear their uniform properly? Well, recognizing that it's because either it's really hot and they're uncomfortable, they're moving around, and therefore it's become become slightly disheveled because they've been doing activity, or whether it's a bit of a fashion thing within the because we have to do something to rebel against this system, and therefore we all do our tie the wrong way round, so the little bits at the bottom so the only kid who doesn't, is there a consistency across the board? And that's where, again, if some kids are allowed and some kids aren't, that creates that discord, and that peer pressure becomes an issue. So he's looking at why? Always the time, why aren't they engaged in uniform? Is it because it's stupid? Because it's boiling hot and therefore they're uncomfortable and overwhelmed, and we'd do the same if we were adults? Or is it because it's a fashion thing, it's a cultural thing, we need to address that, we need to manage it? That would be a big part. Second thing is exactly as you said, it's how we address it. And what I've encountered, and I'm sure you've encountered as well, there's a big difference between passive behavior, aggressive behavior, and assertive behavior. And assertive behavior is recognizing the individual rights or the rules of the organization, but also recognizing the other person's kind of right to an opinion and thoughts and experience. So, like when let's say somebody's speaking rudely to me, if I deal with that aggressively, that would be, don't you talk to me like that. That'd be aggressive. Passive would just be letting them talk to me like that. Neither of those are appropriate, because one is kind of basically giving permission to behavior, and one is, well, if I'm going to be aggressive, surely then I'm giving you permission to be aggressive back. Whereas assertion is kind of going, look, I understand you're upset and maybe feeling angry, but you don't need to speak to me like that. And that's a big difference. And I think exactly as you said there, the way that sometimes teachers specifically, but all people sometimes address behavior is they react and they go aggressively. They challenge rather than go in and kind of go, hey, this is one of the rules. I understand it may be a bit hot, but you need to follow this particular rule. It's like the kid who turns up late to class, isn't it? Right? Is it the teacher then going, what time do you call this? Which is aggressive. Or not saying anything, which means because they're not saying anything, they're giving permission for every other kid in the class to actually turn up late. Or are they managing it assertively, which is a case of saying to the whole group, just as a reminder, everybody, the lesson starts at 9 and you should be sat at your desk at 9 o'clock. Not directing it to that one kid, not personalizing it, not belittling them, not humiliating them or anything like that. But then maybe going over to them in the break and just going, I just wanted to check everything's okay. Would you mind just sticking around at the end? Because what I should be doing is not condemning them, just going, I noticed you're a little bit late. Is everything all right? Because I should still be being a detective rather than a judge. It could have been something going on. And any adult has made that mistake where we've told somebody off for something and then found out because something really bad's happened. Like, you shouldn't be late, and then find out, yeah, that's because their granddad died this morning, a bit upset. And then going, oh, no, I feel bad. Well, why didn't you wait? And before you made that action, you should have responded first. It could have been that. It could have been this. Yeah, that's so boundaries, I think, are really important. But it's the way that those boundaries, it's the behavior of the adult, not the behavior of the child that we're necessarily addressing. We need to address behavior as far as rules, but if I'm being aggressive and telling you off and belittling, well, then shouldn't the child have a right to do that to you? Why are we better than them?
Before I ask you to delve a bit deeper into your 6-stage target model, which is a great framework, a guide that we can follow when it comes to dealing with these behaviors that challenge, I want to talk a little bit about parenting in terms of the reactive approach. So as a parent, for example, if your child runs across the road, you're going to shout.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to potentially reprimand that child because, like, that's fear. It's hard as a parent not to allow that to bubble over.
Yep.
And there are parents that will say, but that works because that child now won't run across that road ever again.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to those people?
Yeah, it's good. And it was a nice thing when you were kind of feeding back to me about the book that you kind of recognized there's a lot in here that isn't just about work. It's like a parent can learn stuff or reflect on stuff, at least, from this. So that I remember there was I think it was Sean Locke, the comedian, who in one of his sets talked about apparently not supposed to shout at children anymore. And he goes, and how's that meant to work? Like, look out, there's a car coming. And it's kind of joke going. And of course, in that moment, a parent is going to shout. My thing would then be, and we'll look at whether that works and doesn't and stuff like that. But what would I do if I saw something dangerous and I was dealing with an adult and they were about to step into the road and I went and shouted at them and look out, there's a car coming? What I'd probably do if they kind of like, if I recognized that maybe I'd been a bit aggressive or a bit rude, then I would then go, I'm really sorry I spoke to you like that. I just generally panicked a little bit in that moment. So why wouldn't we do that with a child? We just explain ourselves. And one of the things that's in the book, I talk about the good manager, bad manager as a model. And when I'm teaching groups, I often get them to kind of do this exercise. I get them to think about a boss that they've worked for and that they liked working for, that was really positive, and what made them a good boss. And then I get them to write about a bad boss, a boss they didn't like, they didn't enjoy working for, and write down the qualities that they found negative. And I get this huge list of good and bad boss qualities or manager qualities. And then I just write the word teacher, caregiver, foster parent, whatever it is, parent, next to each of those things. So a boss has clear boundaries, but if, let's say, you did something wrong yesterday, you worked for me, and I came into a room full of other people and I then told you off in front of your colleagues, well, how would that make you feel? Resentful, belittled, humiliated. And you'd either be telling me to shove my job, you'd be storming out the room, you'd be going home and being upset about it and start looking for another job. You might be more passive aggressive. I ask you to cover a shift for me, do a favor. Sorry, busy. Okay. So you would act out in some way, because it's quite rare especially if you feel as a subordinate to an authority figure, to kind of go, look, I understand I messed up, but the way you did that made me feel humiliated. Please, in the future, just talk to me to one side. Just have a quiet word. So it's important that we recognize, there is a need sometimes going, don't touch that electricity. That's fine. As far as but it works, yes, there is certain strategies. And I would say that the running across the road, it potentially worked probably because a car was about to come as much as anything else. It was a shouting, and there is going to be that emotional response and an emotional conditioning to it. The problem is if we've got a child who has neurological differences or historic differences, so we've got a child with trauma or anything like that, me shouting might actually cause quite a lot of distress. That doesn't mean I shouldn't have shouted, but actually, do they now? So when I've worked, I've done a lot of work with kids who've come traumatic backgrounds and things like that. So if in the past an adult raising their voice at them potentially was quite dangerous, even if I'm raising my voice when they're about to run into the road, that doesn't mean I shouldn't have done it, but I need to recognize that might have a traumatic impact. They may no longer, it might affect their perception of me in the therapeutic relationship, because they might now go, that reminded me of things in the past, and now that scares me. Now that I might damage the trust a little bit from doing that. That doesn't mean I shouldn't have done it. I just need to recognize that then if we get some acting out afterwards, that's potentially because of historic connections. If I've got a kid with neurodiversity, they may not understand me shouting. They may not make the connection, the fact why I shouted, the fact that there was a danger. So am I being explicit in explaining it wasn't because I was angry with you? It's because there was something dangerous and I panicked, and therefore I had to stop you in that moment. So it's context all the time with everything that you kind of said, that it needs to be both the context afterwards, being explicit, explaining, making sure you're helping that child to understand why you raised your voice, why it was important that you did that in that moment, or apologizing if it was inappropriate. Because if I just shouted because I'm stressed, then I need to be demonstrating humility to kind of go, I shouldn't have shouted at you like that. That was me losing my temper. I apologize. Sometimes we all get angry and we say things we don't mean, but I'll try and do better next time. If it's a case of don't walk in front of that bus, I think that's okay. And then you can justify that. Let me ask you a question. Do you ever find the pressures of supporting, teaching, or caring for someone else overwhelming, and wish you had access to more support and information? The Able to Care podcast, in connection with Able Training, has created the ablehub.uk, where for less than the price of a coffee a week, you can access exclusive podcast content, resources, events, and over 45 certified online courses, covering topics like self-care, understanding dementia, neurodiversity, first aid, conflict management, financial advice, and so much more. with new content and courses being added each month. We are so confident that you will benefit from the Able Hub that we are offering 14 days access completely free of charge. No contract, cancel anytime. Become part of the ablehub.uk community and gain the support, knowledge and resources you deserve. Don't struggle alone. Be able. Find the link in the description.
Now, you have a specific six-stage model, the target model, which outlines what we should be focusing on when it comes to dealing with behaviours that challenge. Just give us a little bit more sort of detail about what the six-stage model is, how we can implement it on a day-to-day basis.
So constantly I'm kind of progressing and building on the model and building on the whole system. And within the book, I talk about your kind of preventative, your proactive management and your responsive strategies or your troubleshooting at the top there. And I use the analogy of like the firefighting where we put more work in at the bottom, the preventative, than using a fire extinguisher. The six-stage target model kind of sits in the middle. It's our proactive management. And it's kind of it's a bit like a risk assessment process in some ways, that it's a kind of it can either be used as an analytic tool, but it also then feeds into the other stages. So it either feeds into a principle for troubleshooting, or it actually over a period of time builds on the preventative. So the 6 stages, and I always think of it like a monopoly board. We're constantly going around it. That doesn't mean we have to land on every space, because once I've identified a behavior, I don't need to go back to that every time. Okay. But the 6 stages then, we identify behaviors, we understand and empathize, we then create a proactive plan, we then recognize escalation, we respond appropriately, and then we learn from all incidences, okay? And we're going round that cycle. And that can be used like as an analytical tool. So let's say I've got a child who is, or an individual, anybody, that we are finding some of their behavior feels challenging, okay, to either some staff or all staff. Then that's where we then put them through this model. So first off, the identifying part is, well, like we said about is it actually behavior that challenge? Is it actually maladaptive behaviors, or is it just the fact that I don't like it and I don't agree with it? And if it falls into the second category, it's a case of, well, why are you picking up? It's the wrong battle to pick. So leave them alone, let them do it. You know, if I've got somebody, or we have to understand based on the individual. So I don't like the fact they swear. Well, they've got Tourette's, so I'm not going to change that. So that doesn't even need to be in the cycle. So the identifying is first and foremost part of the behaviors we perceive as challenging. We need to identify those and actually analyze them and go, should I actually be addressing that, or should I be minding my own business? The other part of the identifying is to actually start focusing on the positive, which is one of the principles of the book, is, but what skills and abilities have they already got? Because it's so easy to focus on the behaviors that, the deficits, the difficulties, the challenges, the negatives to this person, and completely miss all of the skills and abilities they've already got that we might actually be able to build their self-esteem with and develop, and allow those adaptive skills to actually meet a lot of the needs that they're currently using maladaptive skills for. The understanding and empathizing is then, I know I put both. Understand is to try and be the detective rather than the judge, like doing things like there's what's called ABC charts, which is where we actually analyze and see if we can see patterns in the behavior, and it's a bit of a functional analysis and things like that to kind of understand why this, why now. When we're dealing in the trauma-informed approach, sometimes it can be really difficult to, like I said, like me raising my voice, let's say shouting a kid down for tea. Well, that's not dangerous. Why does that trigger that response? Because it's not what I did now. It's things that have happened in the past that are actually affecting. So the understanding, empathizing is, I may not understand the why, especially in the one incident, but I need to understand the feelings. The feelings are true, even if the reasoning it doesn't make sense to me. And that works for children experiencing trauma, but it also works with elderly or individuals living with dementia, because it may be something from the past, or they're disorientated, so it doesn't, and we don't make sense of it, but they're feeling that in that moment. The feelings are true. I want my mum. Well, your mum's passed away how many years ago, so that's ridiculous. But what are the feelings they've got at that moment? Are they feeling lonely? Are they feeling overwhelmed? Are they in pain? So again, we need to understand the feelings rather than knowing what's the trigger all the time. So that's why I put both in. From there, we can create our plan, and we should always be planning to proactive management, be proactive rather than reactive. Recognizing escalation, I go into a couple of bits. One is recognizing escalation in them, but I also talk in the book about recognizing escalation in ourselves. So there's also an awful lot in that point about kind of the self-care and and this is something I know teachers are terrible for. And I know something you talk about on your podcast an awful lot as far as like trying to get that self-reflection, if teachers don't have a good level of emotional literacy and emotional awareness and emotional management themselves, why are they expecting they're going to be able to then get any kids to do it? So that's a big part of that particular element of the journey. Responding appropriately, depending where the kid is on their escalation cycle. But the big thing I think is that learning process. When you're training to be a teacher, you have the learning cycle. As far as every lesson, you then reflect on it and go, how did that work? What worked well? But we don't do that around behavior or the reactions. Like as a parent, you admitted that, like, sometimes you'll react to what that kid does, but then that's it, you're done. Whereas what we should be doing is putting ourselves through that model of going, okay, I identified that I lost my temper in that moment. I wonder why that triggered me. What do I need to understand about myself? Okay, they're going to trigger me again that way. So what am I going to do next time? So when we're talking about the 6-stage target model, it's not just for analyzing others. It's also a self-reflective tool we can use for analyzing ourselves. That I need to know what my maladaptive behaviors are and things like that and go through and recognize it. So it's kind of a two-way process. It can also be used as a more dynamic tool in so much as if I see something I'm thinking that needs managing, first thing, pick my battle. Do I need to pay attention to that? Why do I think it's happening? Create a plan before I go in. Where are they on their escalation cycle? And then respond appropriately and then reflect afterwards. So I kind of refer to it in the book that the first three elements, the identify, understand, and proactive, is where we behave like a scientist or a teacher. The recognizing escalation and responding appropriately is where we behave more like a firefighter. And then we go back to being the teacher or the scientist again when we go through the journey. So it should be, it can be used dynamically or it can be used analytically. But by keep going through it, overall, that's going to affect the culture of the organization and affect my understanding of that individual. So it, over time, builds my preventative understanding. Hopefully I explained that. Okay. There's a lot to it. It's a big book.
It is, but it is amazing because like I said to you earlier, it's making me rethink things that I now do as a parent. Like my son used to leave the light on all the time. Still does. It's one thing I hate the most, lights left on and cupboard doors left open. And before that would have been a battle. I would have like happily gone in and fought with him.
Yeah.
But now I just look at it and think, does he even know that he's left it on? Is there something he's run down to because he's excited about something? Is there something that's made him forget, for example? He's realized he's got to put something away because I've told him he needs to put his plate away. So it's making me rethink the situation now. And I'll just turn it off and just think, he won't know anyway. So it's not a fight that I have to fight anymore. But then there has been a time where he's turned it off and I've gone, oh, well done, you turned the light off. Thank you. And he's gone, what have you said well done for? Looking like, confused.
Yeah.
Because mum doesn't say that normally. So yeah, it's making me rethink my parenting for sure.
It's such a simple thing that we take for granted that how nice is it when somebody just acknowledges and appreciates something that you didn't even realize was something that needed appreciating and acknowledging. Just like, it's like the holding the door open for somebody. I don't do it to get gratification. I do it because it's just a nice thing to do. But it's really nice when somebody acknowledges and goes, thank you. Even letting somebody out in the traffic. And it has such a knock-on effect, doesn't it? That like if I slow down and I let somebody pull out, right? And they give me a little wave, I feel nice because I'm like, oh, they waved. That's really appreciated. We get mardy if people don't wave, don't we? So they're just appreciating, even though I was slowing down anyway, or maybe I didn't need to. It was a nice thing to do. It isn't taken for granted. It's appreciated. But what you often find is that has such a knock-on effect. Because then the person behind me probably lets in the next car, and the person behind them lets in the next car, and it just produces that positivity throughout everybody. And I think this is where we can get a huge cultural change. That if people were more in the habit of catching the good, focusing on the positive, recognizing and appreciating, and this is just human relations as a whole. Like I don't know whether you've ever read the books on like love languages, for instance, and stuff like that. So within relationships, there's 5 love languages they typically talk about. So where people show love in different ways. But it's if I'm not experiencing love in the way that I need to feel love. So whether that be, some people are more materialistic, some people are like gestures of goodwill, some are like compliments, some are like, so there's kind of 5 different ones. But remembering to make those habitual of just going, okay, it doesn't take me 2 minutes. I'm at the shop counter anyway. I'm just going to pick up that chocolate bar for my partner just to go, hey, I just got you this. And little bits like that feel so meaningful that if I do them regularly, it doesn't, because sometimes in case I bought you flowers, what have you done wrong? As opposed to just, it's just because when I'm out, I think of you. Therefore, I'm giving you something nice. And I think taking that moment is a true way to build connections and build relationships. And that's where, and it's so easy to lose that, even in a parenting relationship, that we focus on the outcomes rather than the person, and appreciating it's like gratitude, isn't it? It's kind of like being grateful for everything they are rather than being ungrateful for everything they're not. That just saying thank you to your son for turning the light off, even though he should do that, but shoulds and shouldn'ts are dangerous thoughts, is one, increasing the likelihood he's going to do it, but also just demonstrating that you recognize him, appreciate him, and know he's there. And he doesn't have to act out to get attention. He gets attention just because he is, which is always, I think, massively important.
Well, you touched on building relationships there. And as teachers, that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's the main thing when it comes to classroom management, dealing with kids, being a teacher. You have to build those relationships, because then you get to know them a little bit more and you get to understand their triggers and their likes and dislikes. But also you get to understand a little bit more in terms of their background and what things do scare them. They might open up to us, for example, what makes them anxious. So I want to talk a little bit more about attachment theory, because you mentioned that also in your book, and I know we've talked about it before, because I've never had any training in attachment theory as a teacher, never. And after speaking to you and reading your book, I realise now that certain things that might have happened in the past, how they view their parent relationship, impacts their behaviours today. And I see it today in schools with certain students. And it makes me sit back and think, actually, how do we actually approach the situation differently? So how will attachment theory help us when it comes to being a caregiver?
I teach subjects all around, lots of different subjects, whether it be dementia, whether it be autism, whether it be attachment theory, trauma, whatever it is, because I think as part of the preventative, I need to understand what might impact on people's behavior on a day-to-day basis. It isn't always, the nature nurture thing went out the window years ago. And in the book, I go through the biopsychosocial model. So it's partly biological, partly environmental, and partly psychological, and partly socially environmental, that are all factors that affect behavior. And I think for me that by really understanding, like I said at the beginning, the kind of the guy who mugged me, for instance, one of the reasons that I have no animosity is because I assume that there is things that have happened in his life that have affected and caused him to act that way. I don't think that makes him a bad person. He behaved badly in that moment. It did something that I would consider to be socially reprehensible, and therefore he may have to pay the consequences for that. But I don't think that behavior is innately bad. He lacked empathy towards, 3 16-year-old lads by putting a knife in their face at that time. But I don't think that necessarily made him a bad person. I don't know what his history was. I don't know whether he had mental health issues or drug and alcohol issues. Well, I know there was some drug and alcohol issues associated with. But then we go back further. Well, I don't know what his family life was like. I don't know what his upbringing was like. Now, none of this excuses kind of bad behavior. But if I want to understand people and kind of like kind of work on the principle of forgiveness or work on the principle of kind of connection, then I need to recognize people. It's nothing personal. And I think that's one of the always things that I'll sometimes have disagreements with. I don't argue. I teach change behavior. I have conversations with passion. But that kind of understanding allows me to kind of recognize, no, this isn't a personal thing against me. It's a them problem, not a me problem, even though they're making it or they're trying to make it a me problem. And that allows me to better emotionally regulate and to cope and things like that. So I think understanding attachment, that our early life attachments start to create models of who we are in the world and who we think other people are to us within the world. Therefore, that's going to have a massive impact on how I'm going to interact with friends, with teachers, with caregivers, with parents, whoever is in my life. Is going to affect all future relationships and how I perceive, because it's the way I perceive myself and it's the way I perceive others. So of course, that's going to have a huge impact on the approach that you should use. And I know people like to kind of use a blanket approach, but a strategy that works on one isn't going to work on the other, and we'll get one kid that kind of almost refuses to engage and takes an awful lot of like trust building, or another that just seems to latch onto you immediately but then kind of can't cope when you don't give them that attention back. So you've got some kids who are attention needing, and you've got some individuals who are kind of avoidant. They don't connect. Now, if you don't understand why that might be happening, it's easy for a teacher to kind of take it personally. I must not be a very good teacher because I can't seem to connect with that kid. Rather than, this kid may have come from situations that have affected the way that they connect with people, so I need to better understand them to try and find an approach that's going to work. One is fixed mindset, and one is growth mindset. And I know you're a big fan of that.
Yes,
You
I
talk
am.
about it a lot. Yeah, absolutely. And that's it, isn't it? It's a case of, rather than going, it's a me issue, it's a case of, I need to understand this. And maybe it is a me issue, but that doesn't mean it's fixed forever. I can learn better skills. I can do better. I can find ways of connecting. I need to find what's going to work to connect with this kid. But it's not because it's my fault. It could be lots of factors that are influenced. It could be partly my approach. It could be because of things that have happened in the past that I've got to overcome. So yeah, I think I was shocked, and I think I'm always shocked when it comes to teachers, unfortunately, of the lack of training around understanding children or understanding people is included. I get it. It's not teachers' faults, but it is shocking that it's not considered more, because the times are gone and we're just going, I'm just going to spoon feed you this information, and therefore you just need to absorb it and take it and run with it and do whatever you're going to do with it. Because once upon a time, the kids who weren't able to do that would have had jobs from the age of 15. They wouldn't have had to stay in school for that period of time. They would have been able to just go and get their jobs that they enjoyed, where they could be hands-on and they could just be in construction, whatever. But now they're being forced to stay in school till they're 18. They don't connect with it. They don't understand it. They're just being reinforced that you're not good enough within this world, because that's a comparison that they're having. And it's just having a massively detrimental effect. And teachers are personalizing it. And partly, again, it's just teachers are getting the same pressure from above as well, aren't they? So it's not,
I was about to say that.
it's not teachers' fault. It's the people above. This is what, so yeah, government, you should be doing training in attachment. You should be doing training in psychology to be an MP, because you need to understand people. There you go. Police should do it. Teachers should do it. Yeah, you need to understand people if you're working with people.
I want to touch now on human rights, because as a teacher, that's never crossed my mind. That sounds terrible. I've said that to you as I've read your book, because we've given detention after detention. Of course we have. We've got your kid, you got detention 10 minutes, second time, 20 minutes, disrupted lesson, staying behind at break time. We don't think about human rights. So how do we, of course, with the 6-stage model, with your target model, we should be able to incorporate strategies to prevent us risking going against someone's human rights. But that scares me as a teacher.
I mean, the stuff as far as like a detention is concerned, probably not going to meet the threshold of torturous and degrading treatment as far as Article 3 of the Human Rights is concerned. So we should be okay. So within schools, I have seen like what I would consider to be almost the threshold of violation of human rights. Like it was a lady I was speaking to recently, about very distressed about her son, where this school, he is potentially ADHD. So sometimes, and because he was having a miserable time at school, he was often absconding from school and just going home and stuff like that. It was quite amusing. He ran away from school. She checked. He had just gone home. I think he was like 13, 14 or something like that. He'd just gone home. And she checked on him and made sure, because he was at work, and I might need to go. I just need to kind of check. But then he went, I'm going back in now. And he wanted to go in because it was football. And that was like, just spoke volumes. He doesn't want to go in to do the things that he's finding really distressing. And it's not just he finds them a bit uncomfortable. This is causing a fight or flight response to kind of actually cause him to run away So, but I know the perception is going to be, well, he's just a naughty kid and just needs to be told and stuff like that. But what are you going to do? Just strap him to a chair, violate his human rights? So look at why. Why is he running away? There's something that's causing that. You don't run away from places you're happy in. Um, but this particular school had like a basement room where they'd blacked out the windows to limit distractions. And it was, I think there was even, and I don't know how true this is hearsay, but there was apparently a desk where it had a sign on it that just said naughty desk. And that's where he'd be sat if he was on detentions or he was staying after hours or anything like that. He would be sat at that desk. Now, what is that? That, for me, is towards the cusp, especially if in isolation, sitting there not being allowed to talk, not being able to socialize. I get it. Yeah, they use that for prisoners, and I don't agree with that particularly either. But isolation is one of the most torturous things we can do to social animals. So it just doesn't make sense. The one I often talk about is, a child can't sit still because of ADHD or sensory processing disorders. And therefore, because they can't sit still in class, we're going to take their break time away from them. And that just winds me up. Because so the one thing that actually helped this kid, you're going to then take away from them. And then expect him to sit still in the afternoon, even though he's had no movement relief and been able to kind of, resettle, resync with his body or anything like that, or burn off any of the energy that he's really struggling with. That to me is close to torturous, massively. It may not meet the threshold of human rights, but kids being told they're bad every day, we would class that as a safeguarding concern. But I hear people doing it. And I hear it in adult settings as well, obviously not just with kids, like talking down to service users or residents or things like that. So yeah, human rights should be a fundamental aspect to that identify bit. As far as actually, if I'm taking, this is particularly important with adults, like we've got an individual with learning disabilities, for instance, who sometimes gets distressed in town. So right, he's not allowed to go out in town anymore because he might kick off. You can't do that unless there is a justification under law. That's a violation of human rights. So yeah, but then we should be following the model to look at why. Why is he kicking off in town? What's the least restrictive measure?
So, what do you want in terms of the outcome for your book overall? How do you want it to change society as a whole? Because there's a lot of game changing things in your book that I think, if it's implemented regularly and consistently, a lot of things can change.
I always felt like I have a passion for training and doing what I do as far as a trainer is concerned. Because if I can, rather than me just changing one person's life by working with them, if I can teach 12 other people to improve their practice, then that makes a bigger impact. And I think even if one person reads my book, and as you said, like, that's always already more than I'd hoped. It's made me reflect on my practice. It's made me kind of just look at my parenting or look at my strategies within my job and things like that. So one, that's a huge win. I think there's a legacy thing for me. Like I want to make a difference in this world and leave some kind of imprint. And a book is something. A book is something that allows you to do that. We don't live forever, but sometimes the things that we leave behind will carry on after us. And if somebody reads my book and kind of goes, "Hey, that improved my practice." I've had it from some of my courses that I've had the same, like going, "Oh, we had some foster parents who attended your course last year and we were on supervision and they mentioned one of the things that you said that they'd utilized it and it'd been helpful." Those moments for me are the things that are far more important than the feedback I get at the end of a session, just going tick, tick, tick. Yes, it was fives all the way down because that's sometimes because I want to get out of here quick and he would just do that. And I won't even put my email address by and don't get any comments. Glad I got fives rather than ones, but that's not why I do it. I genuinely love helping people. I genuinely want people to read it and feel more confident and competent because I can never guarantee. There's no technique in that book that will definitely mean you're going to be able to change the behavior of somebody else. There is a lot of techniques in that book that allow you to change the behaviors of yourself. And by changing yourself and changing the way you approach things, you then indirectly change the behavior of others. And therefore, the outcomes are positive as a result.
Thank you, Andy, for an inspiring book that it will change lives. It will change people, their perceptions. Like I said, it's already started with me, and I'm now a massive advocate. So I'm going to go back to my school and back to my head, and I'll take her a copy for sure and hand it to her the first day back. So thank you so much. I really had the pleasure of interviewing you today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thanks for some amazing questions. Have you ever encountered an adult or child's behaviour that has felt difficult, overwhelming, or challenging? Have you sometimes felt at a loss of what to do, or know that you didn't handle it quite right? People are complex and unpredictable, and their behaviour can be like the weather. We've all made the mistake of looking out the window and feeling safe to wear shorts, but 5 minutes later wishing for an umbrella. What if, like a weatherman, you understood how humidity, temperature and pressure all come together to cause the weather, allowing you to better prepare, predict and respond, and prevent ever having a picnic ruined by a thunderstorm ever again? My book, called Targeting the Positive with Behaviours that Challenge, helps you to become the weatherman of behaviour. It provides you with a toolkit to increase competency, confidence, resilience and empathy, so you feel more assured about how to respond to distressed or dysregulated behaviours in others, including those affected by trauma, mental health, neurodiversity, learning disabilities or dementia. Build better connections, achieve de-escalation and improve outcomes for yourself and those you engage with my celebrated 6-stage target model, a step-by-step process to reduce distress for everyone. Discover my empowering, person-centered guide in Targeting the Positive, written by me, Andy Baker, available from online bookstores worldwide. Find a link in the description and order today.